There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from caring about something that most people wrote off as a children's show. You try to explain it to someone, and you can already see them forming the smile, the polite, slightly confused smile of a person waiting for the joke. You say, "No, genuinely, there's something in it, something real." And then you watch their eyes drift slightly, and you think, maybe I'll just stop trying. This video is for the people who never stopped trying. Because Adventure Time, this thing that ran on Cartoon Network from 2010 to 2018, this brightly colored explosion of mathematical and algebraic exclamations, this show about a boy and his stretchy dog fighting monsters in a land made partly of candy is one of the most philosophically rich animated works ever made. And I don't mean that in the way people sometimes mean it when they want to make something sound smarter than it is. I don't mean that it has a few deep moments tucked between the silly ones. I mean that the entire architecture of the show, from the world it inhabits to the characters it slowly unmasks to the way it ends, is built on genuine philosophical inquiry. The kind that asks, what does it mean to live? What happens when identity dissolves? How do we keep going in a world that was already broken before we arrived? And perhaps most quietly, most persistently, can love survive the forgetting? I want to go through all of it with you, slowly, the way the show deserves. If you're watching this right now, wherever you are and whatever time it is for you, I'd love to know. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from and what the hour looks like outside your window. I mean it. There's something about this show in particular that people tend to encounter alone at night with the volume low. If that's you, say hello. Now, let's start at the surface, because the surface is not nothing, and then we'll go down. The first thing you notice about Adventure Time, the very first thing, before you understand any of it, is the color. The opening sequence drops you into the land of Ooh through a cascade of saturated greens and blues and pinks, a place that looks like it was painted by someone who ate too much sugar and then fell asleep inside a dream about Dungeons and Dragons. Pendleton Ward, the show's creator, has said in interviews that the fantasy adventure aspect was heavily inspired by that game, specifically the monster manual he read as a kid, with all its wacky, trippy creatures. And you can feel that energy, and ooh, the world has that improvisational quality, that sense that something genuinely unexpected is around every corner, not because the writers are trying to surprise you, but because they themselves are delighted by the strangeness of what they're discovering as they build it. Ward has described the show's creation in a way that aligns with that feeling. He brought a core vision, whimsical characters, a game-like spirit of exploration, a world with more corners than you could count, and then the show developed organically. The creative team layered on mythology and songs and tiny recurring details through a process that was almost archaeological. They kept digging and finding things under what they had already found. That gradual, improvisational approach to world building is why Adventure Time keeps revealing new rooms, even years after you think you've seen everything. Nothing feels over-explained. The answers always generate more questions. The world has the quality of something discovered rather than something designed. It has more depth than you can see from any single angle, and it rewards the kind of viewer who is willing to keep looking. But here is what they built it on top of, and this is the first layer, the thing that changes everything once you see it. Ooh is Earth, not a fantasy Earth, not an Earth-adjacent realm. The actual Earth, roughly 1,000 years after a global catastrophe called the Mushroom War, a nuclear exchange so devastating that the planet's continents have physically deformed, that from space you can see a crater covering what was once Asia. that of the billions of human beings who once walked these streets, almost none remain. Pendleton Ward once summarized the setting as occurring after the bombs have fallen and magic has come back into the world. That's the whole thing in 15 words. And here's the thing that still astonishes me when I think about it. This was not the original plan. According to Ward himself in interviews, the post-apocalyptic nature of OO emerged almost entirely by accident, a creative discovery rather than a design decision. There was an early episode called Business Time, in which Finn and Jake found a group of businessmen who had been frozen in an iceberg. The writers needed to explain why these men in suits were preserved in ice, and the answer they landed on because the world had ended and they'd been frozen since before it changed the show's entire DNA. They just ran with it, Ward said. They started digging down and found the darkness underneath the bright surface, and rather than covering it back up, they kept digging. This matters philosophically before we even meet a single character in any depth, because it means every moment of joy in this show happens in a space that was previously a graveyard. The Candy Kingdom sits on what used to be a human city. Finn and Jake's treehouse has a working computer in it, not a magical object, but an ordinary pre-war piece of technology from a civilization their civilization doesn't even have a complete name for anymore. When you look past the candy architecture and the talking animals and the colorful magic, you see the bones of our world underneath. Subway signs half buried in the earth, cars rusting in the tall grass, a cassette tape, a sweater, a vending machine, still standing, empty, in the ruins of a metropolis. Small evidence of people who once loved the ordinary things that we love now, people whose civilization reached some kind of terrible culmination and then simply stopped. This is not a metaphor about the distant future. It is a metaphor about right now, about every moment of human life, which already happens in the shadow of everything that came before it and ended. The Romans built roads in England that are still visible in some places. The Aztecs built a city under what is now Mexico City. Every place you have ever stood was someone else's place before it was yours, and that someone is long gone. Adventure Time just makes this explicit by narrowing the distance our world ended only 1,000 years ago, which in the geological scale is barely a breath, and the things we left behind are still recognizable if you know how to look. The grief and the beauty coexist in the same landscape. You cannot separate them. This is the show's founding premise, and everything else grows from it. There is something almost unbearably hopeful in the show's choice to make OO beautiful. The Mushroom War was catastrophic. The near extinction of humanity was a horror. And out of that horror, 1,000 years later, something grew that has its own color and its own music and its own cast of deeply strange and wonderful beings who are, in their own way, fully alive. The loss and the beauty are not in opposition. They are the same place. This is the show's founding philosophical move, and it is the one that all the other moves depend on. Finn is 12 years old when we meet him. He is wearing a white hat that covers his hair. He is almost never without it. And he lives in a treehouse with his best friend, Jake the dog, who is not merely a dog, but a magical shape-shifting dog who can grow to enormous size or shrink to nothing, who can turn his body into a boat or a parachute or a very comfortable armchair. They are brothers in every way that matters. Jake's parents found Finn as a baby in the woods and raised him alongside Jake. They know each other completely, or think they do. They will learn, over the years, that knowing someone completely is more like a direction you travel than a destination you reach. And Finn wants, above all things, to be a hero. Not in the abstract, not in the conceptual sense of wanting to be a good person. He wants to actually, concretely, specifically, do good every day. With his body and his sword and his determination, he punches evil, he saves princesses. He follows a moral code he hasn't articulated formally, but that you can feel the shape of in every choice he makes. Help the helpless, oppose cruelty wherever you find it, be brave when it costs you something rather than only when it's easy. One critic, writing for Paste magazine, looked at Finn's specific situation, a human child who grew up without the weight of human history, without civilization's moral guideposts, who had to forge his own value system from scratch in a world where the old one had been demolished, and saw something recognizable from Nietzsche. They described Finn as approximating the Übermensch, a person who affirms life as it happens, both good and bad, who creates a value system from the ground up and exists without being constrained by inherited society or the accumulated guilt of the past. He's grown up without the weight of human history and custom, guided his own way through adolescence, and has become a hero in a dangerous land of his own free will. This is a significant claim, and I think it's accurate, but only for the early Finn, the 12-year-old, who hasn't yet encountered the specific categories of suffering that will test whether the code you built in isolation can survive contact with a world that does not organize itself according to your preferences. Because here is what happens to Finn across 8 seasons. He falls in love with Princess Bubblegum and she cares for him, but not in the way he means. And he has to navigate the specific grief of loving someone who is not wrong for not reciprocating. He falls in love with Flame Princess, a girl kept in a lantern her entire life because her own father was afraid of what she was. And that relationship ends partly because of his own choices, a manipulation he commits in a dream that has real consequences when she discovers it, and he has to sit with the weight of having contributed to something good breaking. He discovers that his father, the Martin Mertens he had imagined his whole life, someone whose existence made him feel connected to a larger human story, is a charming, selfish criminal who abandons Finn in the middle of a crisis with the casual ease of someone who has always prioritized his own escape. And the arm that Finn loses in the aftermath is not just a limb, it is the physical record of what happens when the hero encounters a parent who is simply, casually, not heroic at all. The loss of Finn's arm is one of the most quietly devastating things the show does, and it does it without dwelling. There is no dramatic scene of grief. Finn looks down at the stump, and his face does something complicated, and then life continues. He gets a mechanical arm later, built by Princess Bubblegum. He loses that too. The arm becomes, across the series, a recurring symbol of the cost of caring, of reaching toward people and things that sometimes cannot hold you. Finn develops what the show calls a mental vault, a place inside himself where he puts feelings that don't fit the story he's trying to tell about who he is. The vault is where he stores pain that conflicts with his self-image as someone who just gets up and keeps going. And for a while this works, in the way suppression always works for a while. But a vault is not a solution. It is a pressure chamber. In an episode called Breezy, a healer examines the flower growing from the stump of his missing arm, the show's visual language for his emotional state. And Finn admits, with a flatness that is somehow more devastating than tears would be, I guess I don't feel anything. This is the show being honest about something that almost no entertainment aimed at young people approaches directly. That the accumulation of loss can produce not grief, but numbness. That you can get so good at not feeling the hard things that you eventually stop feeling much at all. And that this is not toughness, it is damage. Finn's real journey across the whole series is not a journey of becoming a better fighter. It is the slower, harder, less visible journey of learning to feel things fully even when they are painful, and then continuing anyway. The hero in Adventure Time is not someone who has no wounds. The hero is someone who carries the wounds, processes them slowly, and keeps going. This is the existentialist position in its least glamorous form, not the version where the hero stares into the abyss and becomes magnificent. The version where the hero stares into the abyss, feels nothing for a while, and then gradually through time and friendship and the daily, unremarkable practice of showing up starts feeling things again and accepts that this is what living actually looks like. But Finn is not the philosophical center of the show. Or he is, but he shares that center with a character who spends most of the series looking like the comic relief. The Ice King's real name is Simon Petrikov. He was, before the Mushroom War, a human antiquarian, a scholar of ancient artifacts, a collector fascinated by the mysteries of lost civilizations. He was warm, he was curious. He was in love with a woman named Betty, and their relationship was built on the particular intimacy of two people who found the same things beautiful. He found a crown purchased from a Scandinavian dock worker, because that was the kind of thing he did: track down strange old objects and studied them. He put it on. He did not know what it would do to him, and then he found out. The crown gave him power over ice and cold. It also began consuming his mind, not all at once. The process was slow enough that there was a period, a terrible, elongated period, during which Simon could feel himself disappearing. He could feel the crown rewriting him from the inside, and what makes this so unbearable is that he was conscious of it. He made video recordings during this period, while he still had enough of his original self intact to understand what was happening. These recordings were discovered by Finn and Jake in a Christmas episode, Holly Jolly Secrets, and the way they arrive, without warning, inside the comedy is part of their power. Simon Petrikov appears on a VHS screen and says, looking directly at whoever might be watching, "I don't know if you'll ever hear this message. I fear my thoughts are no longer my own." Stop there. A children's cartoon, at Christmas time, delivered one of the most precise depictions of dementia that I have encountered in any medium. Simon Petrikov is not experiencing magic in the sense of something wondrous. He is experiencing the progressive, irreversible erosion of identity. He knows what is happening. He can feel himself becoming someone he does not recognize, and the person he is becoming will not remember the person he was. And the worst part, the specific, unbearable, worst part is that the person he is becoming will not be unhappy. The Ice King, when we meet him in the show's present day, is irritating and grandiose and often oblivious, but he is not miserable in any conscious sense. He kidnaps princesses because something in his damaged mind is reaching, without understanding what it's reaching for, toward the memory of Betty, whom Simon used to call his princess. He is a shell running on instinct, on the ghost of a love he has completely forgotten having. Viewers and critics have compared this to Alzheimer's disease since the episode aired, and the comparison holds with an accuracy that feels intentional. What makes it philosophical, rather than merely sad, is the question it places underneath the emotion. Who is this person? When Simon became the Ice King, when the crown finished its work and consumed the last of his original personality, did Simon die? Is the Ice King a different person? When your memories go, when the specific way you understood and experienced the world is replaced by something else, entirely what is left of you. Is identity a continuity of memory? Is it a continuity of body? Is it some other thing that neither of those captures? These are not rhetorical questions in Adventure Time. The show keeps returning to them, testing them from different angles, refusing to resolve them cleanly, because they are genuinely unresolvable. The question of what makes you you is one of the oldest problems in philosophy. Locke put memory at the center of personal identity in the 17th century, and philosophers have been arguing about whether he was right ever since. And Adventure Time understood this and decided to dramatize it rather than answer it, which is, honestly, the most honest approach a work of art can take to a question that philosophy has not settled. The connection to Marceline makes all of this land harder in the way that the best gut punches in art arrive softly, without warning, from a direction you weren't watching. Marceline, the vampire queen, is 1,000 years old. She was born in the aftermath of the Mushroom War to a demon father and a human mother. Her mother disappeared when Marceline was young, or, as the show eventually reveals with the particular delicacy it reserves for its most difficult truths, chose to leave because she was dying of radiation poisoning from the Mushroom War and could not bear for Marceline to watch it happen. This was an act of love. Marceline experienced it as abandonment. And the gap between those two things, the love that looked like leaving, the protection that felt like rejection, echoes through 1,000 years of her life in ways she couldn't have named as a child and barely can as an adult. Her father, Hunson Abadir, the Lord of Evil and ruler of the Nightosphere, was present in a manner that was technically true and functionally insufficient. He is a powerful, ancient, deathless demon who exists at a scale that makes ordinary parental attentiveness difficult. And this is the show's generous reading of him. The moment that defines their relationship in the show's emotional economy is almost comically small. He ate her French fries once. She had been waiting for them. He ate them without asking, without noticing. The casual taking of something small from someone who didn't have much. She wrote a song about it. She was still singing the song as a teenager, hundreds of years later. That is how a small wound stays open. Marceline survived the post-apocalyptic world because of Simon. Because this increasingly unstable man, this man who could feel the crown turning him into someone else with every day that passed, chose to use whatever sanity he had left to keep a small girl warm and safe. He gave her a stuffed animal. He sang with her. He told her stories. He was a father to her in the unglamorous, daily sense of the word. Present, attentive, organizing his remaining capacity around what she needed rather than what would be easier for him. And then the crown won, and Simon became the Ice King. And Marceline was alone, with a stuffed animal and 1,000 years of surviving to do. The episode I Remember You, written and storyboarded by Cole Sanchez and Rebecca Sugar, from a story by Patrick McHale, Kent Osborne, and Pendleton Ward, aired in October 2012, is the point where the show fully commits to the Simon and Marceline storyline, and it is one of the most emotionally precise pieces of storytelling in animation's history. I want to describe it carefully. The Ice King comes to Marceline's house. He brings papers, scribbled notes he wants her help turning into a song. He rummages through the papers with the cheerful self-absorption of someone who has no access to the history between them. Marceline tries to get him to leave, but among the papers he's brought, she finds a letter written to her as a child from the period when Simon still knew who he was and what was coming. He wrote it from the part of the future he could already see arriving, the part where he would be gone, where the crown would have taken him, where she would be left with a stranger who wore his face and used his voice and could not tell her what she meant to him. He does not recognize it as a letter. He does not remember writing it. He sees it as lyrics, and he convinces Marceline to sing the words while he plays drums, completely, joyfully unaware of what is actually happening. And what Marceline sings is this: Marceline, I can feel myself slipping away. I can't remember what it made me say, but I remember that I saw you frown. I swear it wasn't me, it was the crown. Please forgive me for whatever I do when I don't remember you. The camera pulls back. Finn and Jake watch through a window, not understanding what they're seeing. We see Marceline singing Simon's letter to her father who no longer knows he wrote it, who is drumming along with the cheerful concentration of someone who thinks this is just a fun music session. And we see, in flashback, a young Marceline standing in the ruins of a city, crying, and Simon running toward her through the rubble. If you watched this as a child, it landed somewhere you couldn't yet articulate. If you watch it as an adult who has ever watched someone you love become someone you don't recognize, it lands exactly where you already know to hurt. What the show is doing philosophically here is asking a question about love and memory that has no clean answer. If the person you loved no longer exists, if they have been replaced through illness or time or damage by someone who wears their face but has no access to the history you shared, can the love persist? Where does it live? When the other person it was directed toward is gone, does it become grief? Does it become something else? Can you love a person who no longer knows they are the person you love? Marceline's answer, across the run of the show, seems to be yes, imperfectly, painfully, without the reciprocity that normally defines love as a relationship between two conscious people. She continues to carry Simon with her in the stuffed animal he gave her, in the songs she wrote, in the history she keeps even when he cannot, and this carrying is not a wound she can heal. It is simply part of what she is. You cannot separate the 1,000-year-old vampire queen from the girl who was left in the ruins. You cannot separate the grief from the love. They are the same thing, held in the same body. There is in this show a character who embodies, in the specific vocabulary of political philosophy, the utilitarian leader taken to her logical conclusion. Princess Bubblegum, Bonnibel Bubblegum, is at least several hundred years old, possibly older. She is brilliant, warm in her own scientific and slightly clinical way, and she built the Candy Kingdom from nothing in the ruins of the post-apocalyptic world. She literally created life. The Candy People are her creations, beings she grew from sugar and chemistry and her own loneliness in an empty world. She did this because she needed something alive around her in the specific, desperate way that a person who has survived catastrophe and lost everyone reaches toward whatever forms of connection remain possible. She cares about them, genuinely, deeply, in a way that is not in question. And because she cares about them, and because she has lived long enough to watch kingdoms rise and fall, and knows exactly the kinds of catastrophe that can obliterate everything she has built, she does the things that the caring person who has seen too much eventually does. She surveils, she controls, she makes decisions on behalf of her subjects without always consulting them, because the math of what she knows justifies, in her calculation, the intrusion. She has cameras throughout the Candy Kingdom. She has tracking chips implanted in every citizen. She confesses to this openly in one episode with the cheerful nonchalance of a person who has genuinely internalized the position that the protection justifies the surveillance. I spy on everybody. No big deal. And she has deliberately made her people slightly less intelligent than they might otherwise be, because intelligence leads to questioning, and questioning leads to instability, and she has watched instability destroy things. The show frames this as troubling, not with villainous music, not with dramatic confrontation, but with tree trunks, an elderly apple elephant who is possibly the most gentle creature in the entire show, looking at the surveillance apparatus and calling it, in her soft voice, fascist. The word lands because it is, by at least one defensible definition, the right word. The benevolent dictator who knows best, who builds cameras in every room for the protection of the people, who manages the populace's capacity for resistance because she believes they cannot be trusted with full autonomy. This is a recognizable political archetype that has appeared in history with devastating regularity, always wearing the face of someone who genuinely loves the thing they are controlling. This is the oldest tension in political philosophy, the tension between security and freedom, between the leader who knows best and the citizen who ought to choose for themselves. And Adventure Time dramatizes it through a character who is never a villain. Bubblegum is not evil. She is a person whose love for her creation has gradually become indistinguishable from control over it. And the show's commitment to showing both sides of this, her genuine care and her genuine overreach, the real threats she faces, and the real cost of her responses, is one of the most sophisticated political arguments I have encountered in any medium aimed at general audiences. The show eventually has Bubblegum deposed. She loses an election, is replaced by someone worse, watches what happens to her kingdom in her absence, and returns to power having had to reckon with the result of her choices. It does not frame her loss as entirely unjust. The Candy People, whom she had made slightly less intelligent in the interest of stability, chose a charlatan who told them what they wanted to hear. This is the show acknowledging the other half of the political equation. Freedom without wisdom produces its own disasters. The answer to Bubblegum's authoritarianism is not a clean alternative. It is a harder problem, the problem of how to maintain a society that is both free and wise, and the show does not pretend to solve it. It just keeps holding the question open, which is the most honest thing a work of art can do with a problem that civilization has been trying to solve for thousands of years. Now I want to talk about the Lich. The Lich is the show's primary antagonist across its entire run, not the one who appears most frequently, but the one who carries the most conceptual weight. He is ancient, predating human civilization, born from a catalyst comet and given form by the nuclear fallout of the Mushroom War. He is the embodiment of evil in the show's cosmology. Not a god exactly, but something in the category of what you would get if entropy had a face and a voice and a specific desire to see everything stop. He does not want power over the world. He does not want subjects or worship or control. He wants purely for everything to end, all of it, every creature, every kingdom, every fragile moment of joy that any living being has ever stumbled into. He is unswayed by bargains, pleas, or appeals to emotion of any kind. He has no redeeming qualities. He is what he is with a completeness that most characters can only approximate, the desire for extinction given a skeleton and a voice. He delivers. In a child's body, he briefly inhabits, a monologue that functions less as villain dialogue and more as a cosmological position. Before there was time, before there was anything, there was nothing. And before there was nothing, there were monsters. Before there was nothing, there were monsters. Read that again. The Lich is claiming that the most fundamental state of the universe, more fundamental even than nothing, is the monstrous, the destructive, the hungry, that life and light and love are the anomaly, that death is not what happens at the end of things, but what existed before things began and what will exist after things end. and that the whole business of living and caring and building is a brief, statistically improbable interruption in a larger silence. This is, stated plainly, the nihilist position in its deepest form, not the casual nihilism of someone who finds it edgy to say nothing matters. The deep, cold, structural nihilism that looks at the universe honestly and concludes, we are temporary, our meaning is self assigned, and the heat death of the cosmos is the true and final truth of everything. Adventure Time takes this seriously enough not to defeat it trivially. The Lich cannot be killed in any permanent sense. He is destroyed repeatedly across the series, skull shattered, fallen into the sun, turned into a baby, absorbed, trapped, and he returns each time because entropy doesn't stop when you inconvenience it. The force that tends toward dissolution does not stop wanting things to end just because you have temporarily disrupted its form. This is one of the show's most structurally honest philosophical positions. You cannot defeat nihilism. You cannot argue entropy into retreating. What you can do, what Finn does, again and again, for the entire run of the show, is keep choosing to live and to care and to build things, knowing that they will end and building them anyway. The Lich as a philosophical figure is the universe's own indifference given a face and a shape. He is what the world would be if meaning were genuinely absent, not darkly meaningless in a dramatic way, but simply, mechanically finished. And Finn's repeated refusal to accept this position not by defeating it intellectually, but by standing up to it physically and emotionally, over and over, knowing he will have to do it again, is the show's argument for why we should keep going. Not because the argument is easy, not because it's winning, but because the alternative is the Lich. The alternative is giving up on the whole thing. And giving up is the one thing the show consistently treats as something other than an option. I want to spend time on something the show does that I think is genuinely unusual in any medium, its treatment of music as philosophy. Marceline plays the bass guitar, specifically a guitar that was an axe in a previous life, an instrument that suggests both violence and music, both the capacity to cut through things and the capacity to make something beautiful. She is a musician in the serious sense, the kind where the music is not a hobby but a mode of being, a way of processing experience that would otherwise have nowhere to go. She has been making music for the better part of 1,000 years. You do not spend 1,000 years playing the bass and singing without becoming a person for whom music is how you think. The Fry song, the song she wrote about her father eating her French fries, is, on the surface, exactly what it sounds like, a teenager's song about a parental slight that felt like abandonment. Daddy, why did you eat my fries? I bought them, and they were mine. And yet it is also, if you hear it in context, if you hear it, knowing that Marceline is not a teenager, but 1,000-year-old being who has been carrying this specific grievance since roughly the year 1100. One of the most devastating things in the show, the smallness of the complaint and the enormity of what it represents, exist in the same song, that her father, the Lord of Evil, the ruler of an entire dimension of suffering, hurt her most deeply, not through any act of cosmic malevolence, but through the simple, stupid act of not paying attention to what was hers. This is the show at its most brutally honest about what wounds us most. Music in Adventure Time does what music has always done in the best art. It carries what cannot be said directly. When Marceline sings Simon's letter to her in I Remember You, the singing of it is not incidental to the scene. It is the scene. The music is why it lands. Words alone, even the words in the letter, even those beautiful, heartbreaking words would be bearable. But music moves through the body in a way that language doesn't. It occupies a different register, and the combination of Marceline's voice and the melody she finds in Simon's written words creates something that bypasses the ordinary defenses that people maintain against feeling too much. This is not an accident. The show was written with an understanding that music is a form of knowledge, not merely a form of entertainment. Everything stays. The lullaby Marceline's mother sings to her in a flashback is a song about impermanence, about how everything changes while still being itself, about the paradox of continuity through change. And the fact that Marceline hears it as a child in the arms of a mother she is about to lose, and then carries that song inside her for 1,000 years. This is the show's argument that music is one of the ways we carry people after they are gone. The melody is a form of memory that bypasses the conscious mind. You don't remember a song the way you remember a fact. You remember it the way you remember the smell of something that mattered. Rebecca Sugar, who wrote many of the show's most important songs before going on to create Steven Universe, understood this completely. The music in Adventure Time is not decoration, it is argument. It is the show thinking out loud through a different part of its brain. There is a mini-series within the larger run of Adventure Time called Islands, and it is where the show directly confronts a question it has been building toward for several seasons. What does Finn owe to safety? In Islands, Finn discovers that humans have survived the Mushroom War after all. They are not gone. They built a civilization on a chain of islands far off the coast of Ooze mainland, a place called Hub Island, where they live in a condition of elaborate technological safety. They have screens on which their world is organized and delivered to them. They have a system curated, managed, overseen by a guardian named Minerva, who was once Finn's mother, that keeps them alive and protected, and almost entirely free from the kinds of harm that the outside world contains. And they do not leave. They have chosen, collectively, or had chosen for them, across enough generations that the choice is now indistinguishable from nature, to remain inside the safety of the islands, to not go toward the dangerous world, to keep the children safe. The world outside is terrible, and the world inside is comfortable, and the math, if you look only at immediate physical outcomes, is straightforward. Stay in. Minerva, when she sees Finn, when she encounters, for the first time, the child she lost, the child who was carried away as a baby, and who grew up in the world she was trying to protect him from, is alarmed and proud in equal, complicated measure. She is alarmed because Finn has been living in exactly the kind of danger she built the islands to avoid, and the evidence of this is written on his body. He is missing an arm. He has scars. He has clearly been through things that the people of the islands will never be through. And from her position as a mother, as a guardian, this is the very outcome she dedicated her existence to preventing. But she is also proud, and she cannot fully suppress the pride, even though it conflicts with everything the islands represent. Because Finn is alive in a way that the people of the islands, comfortable, safe, watched over, screen engaged, are not quite alive. He has been hurt, but he is fully present. He has lost things, but he is fully here. The danger did not only diminish him, it also, in some ways she cannot entirely disapprove of, made him who he is. This is the show's most direct engagement with the question of safety and freedom, the question that haunts every protective relationship and every society that has chosen comfort over risk. The people of the islands are not miserable. They are, by most measurable standards, fine. They are not growing. They are not encountering the world. They are not becoming anything they were not when they arrived. And Finn, who grew up in the ruins of everything, who lost an arm and a father and several relationships and countless illusions about how the world works. Finn is someone. The existentialist would say this clearly. You cannot choose a self in the absence of risk. The self is forged in the encounter with the world, and a world from which all danger has been removed is not a world that can forge anything. It is a terrarium. Beautiful, perhaps, safe, certainly, but not alive in the sense that requires the possibility of death. Finn convinces his mother to release him. She lets him go because she sees something in him that the islands could not have produced and that she cannot bring herself to refuse him. And Finn goes back to Oo, to the world that has hurt him and will hurt him again, to the world that is broken and magical and full of things that want to eat him and full of people who need him because that is where his life is, not the life that was kept for him. The life he made. There is a moment in the show's finale arc in Come Along With Me, which aired the 3rd of September 2018, running 44 minutes and counting as the show's last 4 episodes, where Finn is offered a choice that the show has been building toward since the very first season. A catalyst comet appears. These comets appear every 1,000 years in the show's cosmology, carrying within them the possibility of fundamental change. This one contains an entity beautiful, immense, genuinely other, who offers Finn the option to transcend, to leave behind the specific experience of being human, of being mortal, of being someone who can be hurt and abandoned, and who loses arms and falls in love and gets his heart broken and wakes up in a treehouse with a brother who will someday not be there, to become something cosmic and free and beyond individual suffering. Finn says no. He says it calmly. The entity seems genuinely surprised the show has framed this as a real offer, a sincere alternative, not a trap. And Finn's reasoning is simple. He wants to live, not in a blissful, transcendent way, in the ordinary, imperfect, error-prone way. He wants to be wrong sometimes, and get hurt sometimes, and wake up in a treehouse, and go punch a monster before breakfast. He wants the human experience, specifically and consciously, over the possibility of leaving it behind. One writer described this moment cleanly. The protagonist decides that the experience of being an error-prone human is worthwhile enough to pass down a stint at godhood. This is the existentialist choice in its purest form. Not because it leads to happiness. Finn has been hurt plenty and will be hurt again, but because it is the choice to remain fully inside the messy, temporary, meaningful thing called being alive. The finale itself is a strange and moving thing. It features a song called Time Adventure, written by Rebecca Sugar and Timothy Kiefer, which has embedded in its chorus a philosophical mantra that serves as the series' final word on everything it has been building toward. The mantra is, will happen, happening, happened. The song's argument is about time and the permanence of experience. Time is an illusion that helps things make sense. It begins. So we're always living in the present tense. And then the crucial turn. The past is not gone. The moments that have already occurred are not erased by the present moment. They are fixed, permanent, permanently real. The moment when Finn and Jake first went on an adventure together will always have happened. The moment when Marceline and Simon were in the ruins and he gave her a stuffed animal and she stopped crying will always have happened. The moment when a person watches this show and feels something they can't quite name will always have happened. You and I will always be back then, the song says. This is a profound consolation if you let it be one. Everything changes, nothing stays. But the specific weight of a specific moment, lived fully, doesn't disappear into time. It becomes part of what time is made of. The past is the most permanent thing there is. You cannot alter it, which means you cannot unhave anything that truly happened. The losses are real, and they stay losses. But the good things, the particular, irreplaceable good things, they also stay. They happened, which means they will always have happened. Will happen, happening, happened, and we will happen again and again. The finale frames the whole series as a story being told to two young people, Shermie and Beth, living in a future beyond even Oo's future. They have found the remains of the treehouse. They have found a sword growing from the branches of a massive tree that grew where the treehouse used to be. They are just beginning their own adventures. The implication is clear. This is not an ending. It is a point on a very long line. Finn and Jake's story has become the mythology for new heroes who will make their own choices in the ruins of whatever came before them. The wheel turns. New people inherit the world. They don't know exactly what happened before them, but they find the sword, and they go on. I want to say something about what Adventure Time was doing for the generation of children who grew up with it, because I think this is essential to understanding the show's full philosophical project. The show ran from 2010 to 2018. The children who were 10 or 11 when it started were 18 or 19 when it ended. They grew up alongside Finn, whose voice changed audibly across the series because the actor Jeremy Shada was going through the same biological processes as the character he voiced. The show incorporated this rather than replacing him because the show believed that the cracking voice of adolescence was part of the story. The story included growing up. The story required it. What this generation received through the medium of a cartoon was a world that had already ended, and people living fully in it anyway. A show that did not protect them from complex emotions by providing clean resolutions. A show that said, yes, the world is broken. Yes, people you love will become people you don't recognize. Yes, you will lose things, and the losing will not always be neatly resolved. The hero is not someone who never hurts. The hero is someone who hurts and keeps going. Meaning is not delivered to you. It is what you make daily through your choices, in full knowledge that the choices are impermanent and the meaning is self-created, and the universe is neither hostile nor supportive, but simply vast, and that this vastness is not the last word because you are here now, feeling things, and the feeling is real. Most entertainment aimed at young people operates on the premise that children need to be protected from unresolved grief, from moral ambiguity, from the knowledge that some losses do not have corresponding gains. Adventure Time operated on the opposite premise, that children can handle the truth if you tell it with enough color and enough warmth and enough willingness to stay in the difficult parts rather than rushing past them. And what this produced for a generation of children who watched it was something that is genuinely rare. Art that trusted them. Art that said, implicitly but unmistakably, in every episode, that did not flinch away from the hard thing, you are capable of this. You can hold the weight of the real. You don't need the difficulty removed. You need to be kept company in it. The show trusted children with the real thing, the grief and the joy together, the loss and the continuation, the world that ended and the world that grew in its place. This is the gift. This is what makes Adventure Time not a children's show with some sophisticated moments, but a genuinely sophisticated work that happens to be accessible to children. I want to spend real time on Jake the dog, because Jake is often the most underestimated part of the whole enterprise, and the underestimation is one of the more interesting, critical blind spots in how the show gets discussed. Jake is On the surface, the comedic counterweight to Finn's earnestness. He is relaxed where Finn is intense, pragmatic where Finn is idealistic, comfortable with ambiguity where Finn desperately wants the world to sort itself into clear categories. He tells Finn, in an early episode, something that has become one of the most quoted lines in the show's history. Dude, sucking at something is the first step toward being sorta good at something. This sounds like a joke. It is partly a joke. It is also a genuine philosophical position about failure and growth and the relationship between incompetence and mastery, delivered without fanfare by a shape-shifting yellow dog. Jake's literal superpower is the ability to take any form. He can become enormous, or tiny, or stretched, or compressed, or shaped like anything the situation requires. He never experiences existential crisis about this. He does not question which shape is his real shape, which size represents his authentic self. He simply is whatever the moment needs him to be, and then he is something else, and then something else again. And all of these are equally Jake. He does not confuse his shape with his identity, because his identity is not a shape. His identity is a relationship with Finn, with Lady Rainicorn, with his children, with the world, and relationships are not fixed things. They move, they shift, they accommodate change. This is what Zen Buddhism calls beginner's mind, the quality of approaching each situation fresh, without the accumulated assumptions that make most human beings less perceptive and more brittle as they age. Jake has beginner's mind, not as an achievement, but as a natural condition. He is not burdened by the way things used to be. He meets each thing as it actually is, in the moment he actually encounters it, and responds to what is there, rather than to what he expected to find, or what he wishes were there instead. Consider how different this is from Finn's approach. Finn arrives at each situation with a theory, a heroic theory, usually, about what kind of thing is happening and what the heroic response to it is. Finn's heroism is real, and it produces real good in the world, but it also sometimes causes harm when the theory doesn't fit the situation, when the heroic framework Finn has built does not accurately account for the complexity of what he's actually facing. Jake almost never has this problem. Jake looks at the situation, and he sees the situation, more or less, and he responds to what he sees. The flexibility of his body is an expression of the flexibility of his mind. He is not committed to any particular shape, because he is not committed to any particular model of how things should be. This is why Jake, despite being less philosophically tortured than any other major character in the show, ends up embodying the show's deepest philosophical position more completely than any of them. He lives inside change without fighting it. He falls in love with Lady Rainicorn, a Korean rainbow-colored unicorn with whom he communicates across a language barrier through a combination of improvised translation and genuine attentiveness, and the relationship works because Jake approaches it with the same openness he brings to everything else. He doesn't need Lady Rainicorn to be something she isn't. He doesn't need their relationship to conform to any template. He meets her where she is, and they figure it out together. And the result is a family, 5 pups, a life. And then the pups grow up. Jake and Lady Rainicorn's children develop with remarkable speed. They are young adults within the same season in which they are born, which is a thing that happens in Adventure Time without extensive explanation. Because the show is interested in the emotional reality of things changing faster than you expected, rather than the mechanics of how the changing works. Jake watches his children become people he doesn't entirely recognize, people with their own perspectives and their own problems and their own complex relationships with who he is and what he represents to them. And he is okay with this, too. Not effortlessly. There are moments of real parental difficulty, but fundamentally, he does not try to keep his children small. He does not try to keep them dependent. He lets them be what they become, which is the hardest thing any parent has to learn to do. The Buddhist concept that lives in Jake Annika, the recognition that clinging to permanence causes suffering, is never articulated by him. He would not use that vocabulary. He would probably describe his philosophy as just going with it, or being chill, or some other formulation that sounds like the absence of a philosophy, but is actually one of the most sophisticated positions you can occupy in relation to a world that will not stop changing no matter how tightly you hold on. The suffering in the Buddhist account does not come from change. It comes from the resistance to change, from the insistence that things be other than they are, from the gap between what is and what we wish were instead. Jake almost never has that gap. He almost always sees what is and responds to it and moves on. His life is not without difficulty, but it is remarkably free of the specific suffering that comes from fighting a battle you cannot win against the basic fact of impermanence. When Jake dies, and he does die, somewhere in the gap between the show's finale and its epilogue, the show does not dramatize it. It conveys it through absence, through the simple fact of him not being there in the future that Shermie and Beth inhabit, through a grave that sits somewhere in the landscape of Ooh as quietly as any other grave. This too feels like Jake. He lived the way water moves, and he departed the way water departs, not dramatically, not catastrophically, but with the completeness of something that has fulfilled its nature entirely and returned to the larger thing from which it came. What he left behind is everything he touched. Finn, who is a better and more complex person because of 30 or 40 years of Jake's companionship and honesty and humor and willingness to tell him the truth even when the truth was uncomfortable. 5 children who carry his specific way of being in the world forward into their own lives. Lady Rainicorn, who built a life with him that neither of them could have predicted when they started. And the memory held by the show itself, by the viewers who watched it, by whoever finds their way to this show in the years to come, of a being who was, in the midst of all the tragedy and philosophy and grief that the show contained, genuinely, consistently, unself-consciously happy. Not because his life was easy, because he knew how to be in it. This is, quietly, the show's most radical philosophical claim, that happiness is not a reward for wisdom or virtue or achievement. It is a practice, a way of relating to the world that can be chosen, partially, in any circumstances. Jake doesn't have less loss in his life than Finn. He has less resistance to it. And the difference between a life organized around resistance to loss and a life organized around acceptance of it is not visible from the outside in any dramatic way. It is visible only in the texture of the living, in whether you arrive at each moment, fresh or burdened, open or defended, ready to become whatever shape the moment needs, or insisting on keeping the shape you had before. Adventure Time has a specific relationship to absurdism that I want to name directly, because I think it gets missed in readings of the show that focus exclusively on its serious elements. Albert Camus argued that the absurd arises from the confrontation between the human need for meaning and the universe's silence in response to that need. We want the world to make sense. The world does not make sense. This is the absurd condition, and the question Camus asked is, what do you do with it? His answer was to revolt, not to suicide, not to what he called philosophical suicide, which is the move of inventing a meaning structure to paper over the silence, but to continue living inside the absurdity fully, to refuse the false comfort of imposed meaning, to keep choosing in the face of the universe's indifference. The land of Oo is an absurdist landscape in this precise sense. The world does not organize itself according to logic. Cotton candy clouds rain cotton candy. A mountain exists that is also a butt. There is a dimension called the nightosphere, ruled by a demon who is genuinely evil, but also an awkward, inadequate father. There is a bear who wears a spacesuit. There is a snail whose possession by the lich is visible in every episode for multiple seasons as a background detail that most viewers didn't consciously notice. The world does not explain itself. It does not justify its own existence. It simply is, in all its enormous, colorful, sometimes horrifying strangeness, and you live in it. What Finn and Jake do in this world, going out every day to solve problems that are often absurd, defeating monsters who cannot be permanently defeated, building relationships that change even as they endure, pursuing heroism in a world that does not reward heroism with any cosmic significance, is the Sisyphean project made joyful. Sisyphus, in Camus's reading, must be imagined happy, not because the boulder is not heavy, not because the hill is not steep, but because the choosing, the doing, the act of living fully inside the task, this is what happiness is, if happiness is possible at all. Finn rolling up the same hill, day after day, in a world that will never be finally fixed, in a world where the lich will always return, and the problems will always be there, and growing up will always hurt, and doing it with something that looks, from a distance, like joy. This is not denial. Finn's joy is not the joy of someone who doesn't understand what's happening to him. It is the joy of someone who understands completely and has decided to be here for it anyway. That decision repeated daily, in full awareness of its cost, is what the show offers as its model of a life well lived, not a life without suffering. A life in which the suffering is carried inside the joy, and the joy is carried inside the suffering, and the two are not in opposition but are, rather, the texture of being fully alive. There is one more thing I want to say, and it is about something the show accomplishes that I haven't yet named directly. Adventure Time is a show about the specific experience of carrying grief while still being present for joy, not alternating between them, not resolving one into the other, simultaneously. Marceline, who has been alone for 1,000 years, plays music anyway. Simon, who lost himself piece by piece and knew he was losing himself and could not stop it, kept choosing to protect Marceline for as long as any piece of him remained to make that choice. Finn, whose arm is gone and whose father is useless, and whose most earnest heroic efforts sometimes make things worse, wakes up every morning and puts on the white hat. The show does not offer this as inspiration in the shallow sense. It does not say, "Look, even in your darkness you can find the light." It says something quieter and stranger. These things coexist. The darkness and the light are not in opposition. They occupy the same space, the same chest, the same voice, singing the same song. Marceline's music is the grief and the joy at once, inseparable, both fully present. That is not a resolution. That is not a silver lining. That is what it actually feels like to be alive when you stop trying to simplify it into something more manageable. Adventure Time understood something that many stories for adults fail to understand, that the truest human experiences are not the ones where the light wins and the darkness is defeated. They are the ones where you find a way to hold both without requiring them to resolve into something simpler than they are. The show did this again and again in 11-minute episodes with candy people and vampire queens and a man who became a snowstorm and forgot who he was. And it did it with such specificity and warmth and willingness to stay in the difficult parts that an entire generation of children grew up knowing, without necessarily having words for it yet, that it was okay to feel the hard things fully. That feeling them didn't mean something was wrong with you, that the world was broken and you were going to live in it anyway, and that this, exactly this, was the adventure. I want to talk about what the show calls the Enchiridion, because it functions as a philosophical object inside the narrative in a way that almost no props in animated television do. The Enchiridion is a book, a hero's book. It appears early in the series in what is actually the very first episode, titled simply The Enchiridion, as the object Finn is tasked with retrieving from a dangerous dungeon as a kind of test of his heroism. On the surface, this is a straightforward quest. Finn has to prove himself by getting the book. He gets the book. He proves himself. Simple enough. But the Enchiridion keeps coming back, and the more it comes back, the more you understand that the book is not a MacGuffin. It is a philosophical statement about what heroism actually requires. The book contains instructions for how to be a hero, and those instructions are never quite what you expect them to be. The dungeon through which Finn must pass to claim it contains not just monsters to fight, but moral tests, situations where the heroic action is not the obvious one, where doing the right thing requires choosing a different good over an obvious good, where the correct path is the one that looks less like the triumphant fantasy version of heroism and more like the complicated, sometimes self-denying, sometimes counterintuitive practice of genuinely trying to be good in situations that resist easy answers. The book is the show's argument about what a code of heroism actually is. It is not a set of rules that produces correct outcomes reliably. It is a practice, an ongoing, difficult, constantly revised practice of trying to figure out what good actually means in each specific, irreducible, complicated situation. Finn carries the book. He loses the book. He finds it again. He loses it again. The pattern of his relationship with the Enchiridion mirrors his relationship with his own heroic identity. He holds it. He is tested by it. He lets it go. He picks it up again. And the heroism that exists at the end of the series is not contained in any book. It is written into who he has become through the process of trying to live up to something that was always slightly beyond him. This connects to a broader philosophical tradition, specifically to Aristotle's concept of virtue ethics that the show engages with implicitly throughout its run. Aristotle argued that virtue is not a fixed quality you either have or lack. It is a habit, a practice, a state of character that you develop through repeated action in the right direction. You become brave by doing brave things, even before bravery feels natural. You become good by practicing goodness, even when the outcomes are uncertain and the recognition is not forthcoming. The virtuous person is not someone who was born with the virtue. They are someone who kept practicing it until it became who they are. Finn is the Aristotelian hero. He is not born good. He practices goodness every single day. In a world that does not guarantee the practice will be rewarded, and the repeated practice of it shapes him into someone for whom goodness is not a performance but a character. When we meet him, he is 12 and eager, and slightly naive about how the world works. When we leave him, he is older and scarred, and wiser, and more uncertain, and also more deeply more genuinely heroic, not because he has learned the rules, but because he has internalized the practice so completely that it is no longer something he does, it is something he is. The Enchiridion, ultimately, is not a book at all. It is the name the show gives to the process of becoming. And that process never ends, which is why the show ends with someone else picking up the sword, someone who will begin their own version of the process, in their own version of the world, and the cycle continues. The hero is not a fixed role. It is a direction you keep choosing to move in. There is a sequence in the episode Simon and Marcy, a flashback episode that shows us Simon and a young Marceline during the early post-apocalyptic period, before the crown had fully taken him, that I want to describe in detail, because it is, in my judgment, the single most perfectly crafted sequence in the entire series. Simon is struggling. The crown is working on him, doing its slow damage, and there are moments when the Ice King breaks through, when his voice drops and his eyes change, and something not Simon is briefly present in his face. And then there are moments when he fights back, when Simon resurfaces and reasserts himself through sheer force of will. During one of these struggles, in the ruins of what used to be a city, Simon grabs onto something that many viewers would recognize immediately: the theme song from the American television sitcom Cheers. He begins singing it, quietly at first, then with increasing desperation, his voice distorting as he tries to hold on to the words, as though the familiar melody is a rope he is clinging to. Something from the world that existed before everything fell apart. Something that proves he is still himself by the fact of his knowing it. The Cheers theme is, by any reasonable measure, an extremely unlikely thing to find at the emotional center of a deeply serious animated sequence about the nature of identity and the horror of its dissolution. And yet it is absolutely the right choice. Because what Simon is doing is precisely what people do when they feel themselves losing touch with who they are. They reach for something familiar, something ordinary, something from the fabric of the everyday that the self is partly made of. He is not reaching for a profound memory. He is reaching for a television theme song. And the specificity of that, the sheer ordinariness of what the human mind reaches for when it is trying to survive, is what makes the sequence devastating rather than merely sad. The song continues, and his voice distorts further, and then he hits the line that ends the chorus, where everybody knows your name, and he realizes, mid-song, that he no longer knows his own name, that the crown has taken even that. He falters, and Marceline, who has been watching with the incomprehension of a young child who doesn't understand what she's seeing, but understands clearly that something is very wrong, reaches out to him. The relationship between music and identity is what this sequence is about. What Simon is trying to do is use music, the physical fact of singing, the memory encoded in the melody, the way music stores experience in the body differently than language stores it, to anchor himself to who he is, to use what has been remembered in the bone as a counterweight to what is being forgotten in the mind. And it almost works, and then it doesn't. And the failure is the specific failure of watching someone lose the fight with something you cannot help them fight. If you have ever watched someone you love lose themselves to illness, to addiction, to whatever private catastrophe consumes specific people in specific ways, you know this scene. You know exactly this scene. The reaching for the familiar thing, the brief return, the failure of the return to hold, the moment when the ordinary, beloved, slightly silly thing that they clung to is suddenly not enough to bring them back. Adventure Time found this experience inside a Cheers theme song in a post-apocalyptic city, in an 11-minute episode of a children's cartoon. That is either absurd or it is what art is supposed to do, and I believe it is the second one. I want to spend some time on the question of what the show is doing with its cosmology, because Adventure Time builds one of the stranger and richer cosmological frameworks in animated television, and the philosophy embedded in that framework is easy to miss if you're not looking for it. The world of Ooh has a specific set of rules about what exists at the largest scale. There are catalyst comets, which arrive every millennium, carrying agents of change, the possibility of transformation at the cosmic level. There is Galb, the deity of chaos and disorder, who dissolves things into their constituent components, who strips away identity and memory and leaves behind formlessness. There is Death, an actual character, who presides over the dead world with the combination of cosmic authority and personal quirkiness that the show grants to all of its apparently terrifying entities. There is Prismo, a god of wishes, who exists as the dream of an old man sleeping in another dimension. And when the old man is killed, Prismo dies. And the loss of Prismo's existence is one of the show's quietest tragedies. A being of vast power and genuine warmth, extinguished because of his own decency. What the show does with these entities, rather than using them as plot mechanics, is build a picture of a universe in which the largest forces are not fundamentally hostile to life, but are also not fundamentally supportive of it. They are simply what they are. Golb does not hate Finn. Golb is dissolution, and dissolution does not harbor opinions about the things it dissolves. Death is not malevolent. He runs his kingdom with a certain bureaucratic efficiency and can be bargained with under the right circumstances. The universe's deepest structures are not organized around human or human-adjacent experience in any way that privileges it or protects it. This is the cosmological expression of the show's existentialist position. The universe is not for us, and it is not against us, and the business of finding meaning is entirely our own project. We are not owed a cosmic endorsement. The comets arrive and offer change. The change might be good. The change might be terrible. Gold might be invoked and might dissolve things you were hoping to keep. Death will collect eventually. None of this is fair. None of this is unfair. It simply is. And yet, and this is the show's crucial move, the characters are not paralyzed by this. They are not nihilistic. They do not respond to the universe's indifference by giving up on meaning. They respond to it the way Camus suggested we should respond, by creating meaning anyway, in full knowledge of its fragility, with the specific joy of people who understand that the fragility is part of the beauty. A moment is not less valuable because it ends. A relationship is not less real because the universe doesn't record it. Prismo was real. He mattered to the people who knew him. The fact that his existence was contingent on an old man's dream in another dimension does not diminish what he was or what he meant. This is the philosophy the show is building toward across all 10 seasons, through all the monsters and magic and absurdity and grief. That meaning is possible in a universe that does not require or guarantee it, if you are willing to do the work of making it, not finding it. Making it. Out of the specific materials of your specific life, in the specific world you inhabit, with the specific people you find yourself loving. The show's treatment of the question of good and evil is worth spending considerable time on, because it is one of the places where Adventure Time is most philosophically sophisticated and most different from the usual approach of children's entertainment. Most narratives aimed at young people and many narratives aimed at adults operate on the assumption that good and evil are properties of characters, inherent qualities that define who someone is. The good characters do good things because they are good. The evil characters do evil things because they are evil. The conflict between them is the conflict between good and evil as stable categories, and the resolution of the story is the triumph of good over evil, which confirms the universe's alignment with the good. Adventure Time dismantles this framework so thoroughly and so early that it is almost astonishing that it was allowed to air on Cartoon Network. The Ice King is the villain of the show's first season. He kidnaps princesses. He is antagonistic toward the protagonists. And then the show reveals that he is a person who lost his mind to a magical artifact and has been suffering from the loss for 800 years. And suddenly the character who was evil is revealed to have been tragic all along. And the evil he was doing was the expression of a specific anguish that he couldn't even access consciously. But the show doesn't stop there. It also reveals that Finn and Jake, the heroes, the good guys, the protagonists whose perspective we inhabit, are sometimes wrong. They make mistakes that have consequences. They cause harm through their own actions. Finn manipulates Flame Princess, and she discovers it, and the relationship ends. Jake sometimes prioritizes his own comfort over the needs of people around him. Princess Bubblegum, who is a hero in many respects, runs a surveillance state. Even Marceline, the show's most complex character, the one who has suffered most and most arguably earned the right to simple moral clarity, has moments of cruelty, of self-absorption, of treating other people as props in her own ongoing drama. What the show is building is a moral landscape in which the question is not who is good and who is evil, but what we do with the mixture of both that exists in every person and every relationship. This is a vastly more sophisticated moral position than the binary, and it has the additional virtue of being true. The world is not organized into good people and evil people. It is organized into people, all of whom contain the capacity for both goodness and harm, all of whom are acting from a complex mixture of motives that includes genuine love and genuine selfishness and genuine fear and genuine courage, all mixed together in ways that resist clean sorting. Adventure Time's moral argument is not that everyone is essentially good, which would be a different kind of oversimplification. The Lich is not going to turn out to have a kind heart underneath. Some things are genuinely terrible and must be opposed, but the show insists that most of the moral landscape is not occupied by the Lich. It is occupied by people like Simon and Bubblegum and Marceline and Finn, people with real goodness and real limitations and real histories that shaped both, people who are doing their best in conditions that their best is often not enough to fully resolve. And the show's moral argument is that you meet these people with the same complexity they bring to you. You extend your imagination toward their history. You try to understand what made them who they are before you decide what they owe you. This is not moral relativism. The show has commitments. It believes that kindness is better than cruelty, that presence is better than abandonment, that courage is better than cowardice. But it holds these beliefs without the rigidity of a person who has never been tested, and it dramatizes what those beliefs cost in conditions that are genuinely demanding of them. Goodness in Adventure Time is not a quality you have. It is a quality you keep choosing to enact, knowing that it will be difficult, knowing that you will sometimes fail, knowing that the failure is not the end of the practice. There is something I want to say about the show's legacy that requires a little honesty about the moment we're in right now, watching this, however many years after it ended. Adventure Time ended in 2018. It spawned a spin-off, Adventure Time, Distant Lands, which aired between 2020 and 2021 and gave us 4 extended episodes set in the aftermath of the original series. It spawned another spin-off, Adventure Time, Fiona and Cake, which aired in 2023 and followed Simon Petrikov in the aftermath of his return to himself, navigating the specific depression of having regained his identity in a world where his identity no longer had a context. And in the years since the original series ended, the show has accumulated an audience that it didn't quite have when it was airing, an audience of people who missed it the first time and came back to it as adults, or who watched it as children and returned to it as adults and found entirely different things there, or who watched it with children of their own and were surprised to discover how much of it was for them. This is what happens with the best work. It doesn't date, it deepens. The things you missed at 10 are there when you're 30. The grief you weren't old enough to recognize yet is there when you are. The philosophical questions the show was asking have not gotten easier in the years since it asked them. If anything, in a world that seems increasingly organized by the logic of the lich, by the logic of dissolution, of things we built being slowly unmade, of the warming, of the only planet we have, because we couldn't stop ourselves from burning it. The show's vision of a world rebuilding itself from catastrophe feels more relevant rather than less, more necessary rather than less. I want to be careful here, because speculation presented as fact is a specific intellectual failure I try to avoid. So let me say plainly, this is my reading. Other readings are possible. But when I watch Adventure Time now, in 2026, I find in it a specific kind of consolation that I did not fully appreciate when I first watched it. The consolation is this: catastrophe is survivable. Not without loss, the loss is real, and the show never pretends otherwise. But the world that comes after catastrophe is not merely the ash of what came before. It is something new, strange, alive in its own right, capable of beauty that the previous world was not capable of. Ooh is not post-apocalyptic Earth minus everything good. Ooh is post-apocalyptic Earth transformed, mutated, reorganized into something that has its own beauty and its own love and its own heroes. The Candy People are bizarre and wonderful. Marceline's music is real music. Finn's heroism is real heroism. These things exist because the Mushroom War happened, not despite it, in the sense that the specific form of this world required the catastrophe to produce it. This is not an argument for catastrophe. I want to be very clear about that. The Mushroom War was terrible. The near extinction of humanity was a horror. No one should look at this reading and conclude that suffering is good because it produces interesting outcomes. The suffering is real, and the loss is real, and these things matter. But the show's argument is also real. In the aftermath of the worst thing, life persists. It changes. It grows into the new shape of the world, and it keeps going. And the things it produces in the going can be genuinely, unexpectedly, irreducibly beautiful. This is what I needed to hear. Reading this show now, maybe it's what you needed too. The world was already broken. It has always been broken. And people have always lived in the ruins, and made music in the ruins, and fallen in love in the ruins, and built candy kingdoms, and carried stuffed animals, and sang to each other in the rubble. And this, the persistence of all of this, the determination of life to keep being life in the face of everything that opposes it, is the truest thing Adventure Time ever said. There is one more detail I want to leave you with, because it is small and precise, and it is the kind of thing the show does that stays with you long after the grand themes have diffused into the general memory of having watched something good. In the very last sequence of the original series, in the epilogue set in the far future, after Shermie and Beth have found the sword and the treehouse tree and have begun their own adventure, the camera lingers for a moment on the tree. The massive tree that grew where the treehouse used to be. The tree whose branches hold the sword that was Finn's, that will now be whoever needs it next. The tree grew from a seed. The seed came from Fern, a grass version of Finn, a complicated creature born from a magical accident who struggled his whole brief life with questions of identity and deserving, and who ultimately chose to sacrifice himself so that Finn could live. Fern's death produced the tree. The tree holds the sword. The sword will be picked up by the next hero. This is the show's most complete statement about what legacy means, and it is entirely visual, entirely quiet, entirely without explanation. The things we sacrifice become the roots of what comes next. The people we lose become the ground that new life grows from. The grief is real and permanent, and also generative. It does not produce happiness, exactly, but it produces possibility, which is the thing that happiness requires to exist at all. Nothing stays. Everything was here. I've been sitting with this show for a long time, longer than I expected to when I started pulling on these threads. And what I keep coming back to is not any single episode or character or philosophical argument, but something more like a texture, the specific texture of watching something that takes you seriously, that doesn't rush you, that builds a world and then keeps going deeper into it, keeps finding new rooms underneath the rooms you thought you had already explored. The world of Ooh is brighter than our world. It is also more honest about what our world contains. The candy is real candy, the magic is real magic, and the grief is real grief. When Marceline sings, you feel it. When Simon's recordings play, you feel it. When Finn falls down and gets up and falls again, you feel it. The show achieves something genuinely rare, a world that is at once completely fantastic and completely sincere. There is no irony in Ooh. There is no winking at the audience. The show is not embarrassed by its own heart. This unself-consciousness is the most philosophically important quality of the entire enterprise. We live in a cultural moment where sincerity has to be armored, where you prove you know something is corny by preemptively calling it corny, where you demonstrate your sophistication by maintaining distance from the things that actually move you. Adventure Time does none of this. It simply has feelings about the things it is about, and it expresses those feelings directly through the specific images and voices and songs that hit you exactly where they intended to hit you. The show begins with a simple theme song that sounds like a proclamation. Adventure Time. Come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands. It ends with a quiet meditation on time and love and the permanence of what has been. The distance between those two moments, between the bright, simple opening and the earned, careful conclusion, is 8 years and more genuine philosophical inquiry than most works in any medium manage across a lifetime. What Pendleton Ward and his collaborators built was not a message. It was not a lesson. It was something more honest than that. A world that thinks slowly and playfully, and sometimes with devastating precision, about what it means to be here. To be conscious in a broken place with people you love, knowing that it ends, choosing to love them anyway. The ruins are real, and the grass grows through the concrete. And 1,000 years after the bombs fell, a boy wakes up in a treehouse and decides to be a hero. And this is not a fairy tale. This is a description of what living looks like when you commit to it fully, in the specific, irreplaceable time you have, in the specific world that is yours, whether you chose it or not. That boy grew up. We watched him do it, and we grew up alongside him a little bit in ways we might not have names for yet. The adventure is always just starting. If this video meant something to you, please leave a like. It genuinely helps more people find this channel and find conversations like this one. And if you've been here the whole time and haven't subscribed yet, the button is right there. No pressure. But there's more of this, more slow, patient, late night exploration of the things we love and what they mean beneath the surface of them. I hope you'll stay. Drop that comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, what time it is where you are, and whether the window behind you is dark or starting to get light. I read every one. Will happen. Happening. Happened. Will happen again and again. And what I keep coming back to is not any single episode or character or philosophical argument, but something more like a texture, the specific texture of watching something that takes you seriously. That doesn't rush you. That builds a world and then keeps going deeper into it, keeps finding new rooms underneath the rooms you thought you'd already explored. The show begins with a simple title card and a theme song that sounds like a proclamation. Adventure time. Come on, grab your friends. We'll go to very distant lands. It ends with a quiet song about time being an illusion and love being the thing that was always there before and after the present moment. The distance between those two things, between the bright, simple opening and the earned, careful conclusion, is 8 years and more philosophy than most shows try to fit into a lifetime. What Pendleton Ward and his collaborators built is not a message. It is not a lesson. It is something more honest than that. It is a world that thinks, slowly and playfully, and sometimes with devastating precision, about what it means to be here, to be conscious, in a broken place, with people you love, knowing that it ends, choosing to love them anyway. The ruins are real. The grass grows through the concrete. 1,000 years after the bombs fell, a boy wakes up in a treehouse and decides to be a hero, not because the universe requires it, not because the story needs it, not because it will all work out, but because that is what he is. And the being of it is enough. The choosing is enough. The daily act of reaching toward good in a world that doesn't guarantee it will be rewarded is enough. That's not a cartoon. That's not a children's show. That's a genuine attempt at wisdom, wrapped in candy and absurdism, given to a generation of young people at exactly the moment they needed someone to trust them with the real thing. They deserved it. They were ready for it. Most of them already knew, even at 10 or 11, that the world was broken. What they needed was someone to show them that life grows in the ruins anyway. And it does. It has always grown in the ruins. That's what life does not, despite the damage, but through it, and sometimes because of it, finding its way into every crack, reaching toward whatever light is available, making something new from what the catastrophe left behind. Come on, grab your friends. The adventure is always just starting. If this video meant something to you, please leave a like. It genuinely helps more people find this channel and find conversations like this one. And if you've been here the whole time and haven't subscribed yet, the button is right there. Not as a transaction, but because there's more of this more slow, patient, late-night exploration of the things we love and what they mean. I hope you'll stay. Drop that comment telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is, and whether the window behind you is dark or starting to get light. I read every one. Will happen. Happening. Happened. Will happen again and again.